It's 6 o'clock. Welcome to our very first Online Koala Forum. My name is David. I'm a research fellow here at social marketing at Griffith, and I will be your host tonight. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting and pay my respect to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I would like also to acknowledge the great support we receive from the Department of Environment and Science, who make this forum tonight here possible. In terms of our program today, we have a range of speakers to cover different aspects of koala conservation here in South East Queensland. We have our first speaker, Stephen Howell from the Department of Environment and Science and Innovation, followed by Chris Mybush from the Toowoomba Region Koala Habitat Project, followed by Natalie Hillcoat from Healthy Land and Water. We have then Michelle Daly from the Koala Action Gympie region. And our final speaker tonight is Cameron Costello from the Quandamuka Yuluburabi Aboriginal Corporation, also short kayak. And afterwards, we have a panel discussion. So I will talk a little bit about this in a second, how you can submit your question. But before, you may notice we had initially promised you 6 speakers tonight, but I have to apologize. Andrew Hoskins from CSIRO, who can't be here with us tonight. In terms of the question for the Q&A session later on, our final session tonight, during the sessions, you're more than welcome to submit your questions. You have a Q&A box on your screen, and we will go through the question and then ask the panelists at the end to answer them. It would be nice if you can indicate which speaker you would like to ask the question, or if it's for everyone, you can of course also mention that it's for everyone. In case you missed a slide or two, don't worry. We will record the full session and make it available on our social media pages. Just make sure you follow Wildlife Watcher, and we will also send out a PDF copy of all the slides to all the registered attendees. So if you haven't provided your email address, you can obviously reach out to us and we will send you the slide afterwards. All right, now please welcome our first speaker tonight, Stephen Howell from the Department of Environment, Science and Innovation. Stephen Howell is the manager of the Biodiversity Assessment Team at DAISY. He's a dedicated landscape ecologist with many years of experience in koala conservation, dating back all the way to his undergrad days, where he was catching and releasing koalas around Aratula. Stephen's team plays a vital role and is responsible for the assessment of terrestrial and aquatic conservation values across Queensland as a critical input into planning, policy, and legislation. And tonight, Stephen will pull back the curtain on koala habitat mapping and explain the intricate details and challenges involved in mapping these crucial habitats within a regulatory framework. Over to you, Stephen.
Excellent. Great. Thanks very much, David. And thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. It's very, very much appreciated. So as David mentioned, I look after the Biodiversity Assessment Team. So we're part of the Queensland Herbarium and Biodiversity Science within DESI, Department of Environment, Science and Innovation. And what I'd like to have a bit of a chat today about is just why it is so hard to map habitat and protect koalas. So I will focus on the mapping and how the mapping came together for the koala conservation strategy. And then just a few slides at the end, just talking about some of the challenges about fitting that within a regulatory framework. So just a little bit of background in terms of koala habitat mapping and modelling. And I will use the term modelling and mapping a little bit interchangeably. They are slightly different things, but I'll just probably switch between the two. So this map's a little bit old, but it shows koala records across Queensland. And you might be able to see just down there in the bottom right-hand corner is a South East Queensland bioregion. And that's where we've got the koala habitat model at the moment. So I'm going to be focusing on this area here, that light green area, which is these local governments. So this is a shaping SEQ, local government areas. We don't really like doing habitat models based on planning boundaries. We much prefer to do habitat models on the full extent of the species, or even just on ecological boundaries like bioregional boundaries and things like that. But this was done initially when we did this habitat mapping. It was done through the Shaping SEQ initiative. You can see the different LGAs listed there in the area. We haven't done a habitat model for each of those LGAs. We've done one for the whole area. It's just convenient to just give everyone a bit of an idea as the area that I'm talking about. So in terms of the koalas and koala mapping, we have the koala habitat areas, the locally refined koala habitat areas, and the koala priority areas. So they're the three layers that actually exist under the SEQ Koala Conservation Strategy. And the main focus I'm going to be talking about today is the KHAs, the koala habitat areas. I won't get a chance to talk about the LRKHA or the KPAs, those two other ones. I also won't get a chance to talk about the koala habitat restoration areas, the KHRAs. So these are areas that we've identified that might potentially be good for restoration or rehabilitation. And there's also the work that we've done in terms of that initial work to identify those koala threat priority areas. And that's feeding into the excellent work that Healthy Land and Water are doing. So, but what I will do is I will focus at the end on what's happening in the northern part of the bioregion. So I'm going to focus on the southern part of the bioregion as part of the Koala Conservation Strategy, but then I'll talk a little bit about where we're heading to in the northern part of the bioregion. So just to, in terms of the principles, I'll just go through this a little bit really quickly, but this is just about the habitat model and how we develop and what the basic principles are. So based on contemporary methods, best available science and data, based on regional ecosystems and high value regrowth mapping, I'll talk a little bit about that in detail later on. It's tenure independent. Just because an area is in a national park or a nature refuge doesn't mean we value it any more or less. It optimizes the use of existing data information, transparent, repeatable. It's a decision support tool in terms of the base mapping that we do. And it's end use neutral, but it does feed into end uses like the Koala Conservation Strategy. So in terms of habitat modeling and why we chose to go down this particular path that we have for the koalas. So most of the modeling that we do is based around buffered species points. So we get these records from corporate databases, from external databases, a whole range of different areas. We do some validation, we do some filtering, date, precision, etc. We put a buffer around it, and we say any vegetation within that buffer is habitat for that species. And that's not too bad. In the absence of any other information, in applying the precautionary principle, that's a fairly good way of identifying habitat for that species. But our preference really is to do habitat modeling. So habitat suitability modeling, and that's what I'll be talking about for the koalas. So we core habitat based on vegetation and other biophysical data, more ecologically accurate, but way more time consuming. Takes a lot longer to create these habitat models. So just a little bit of examples. So you can see there's a little point down here for, this is another sighting of not necessarily koala, but a species that is seen down here. If we were to put a buffer around it and then select all the vegetation that falls within that buffer, we'd be picking up polygons and areas of vegetation that are quite a fair distance away from that point. And you wouldn't necessarily say that that was actually core habitat for that particular species. Just imagine this species is actually probably a riparian species, and it's often found along this riparian veg that you can see here. So our preference is to develop a habitat model that actually would identify that area there as being core habitat for that species. We don't need the record anymore, but we still obviously keep the records. But then the advantage of this is that we can extrapolate that to other areas. So we can say that this area over here, even though there were no records for that particular species in that area, we still think it's core habitat because it has all the right parameters that I'll talk about in a few seconds. So that's the basis for the habitat modeling that we've got for koalas. So getting into the habitat model, so core KHA, so koala habitat areas. So this is designed to represent the best quality habitat areas based on whether it's got suitable vegetation, whether we've seen a koala there or not, and also modeling and biophysical measures for the koalas. So, and I should point out that 2 of those images are from Deep AI, and one of those images is from White Hill Reserve, a picture of a koala I took a year or 2 ago. So, so what I'll do is just sort of just tease that apart a little bit and just give you the elements that go into this habitat model. So I'll start with the vegetation and what's important for koalas. So we've had a look at the vegetation, the regional ecosystems, and the high-value regrowth, and we've been able to rank them in terms of their importance for koalas. So this is a pre-clear map of vegetation across South East Queensland. So that's what the vegetation that used to be there. And we've assigned it ranging from high to very low and not habitat. And that's based on expert opinion, it's based on published papers, et cetera, et cetera. So something like a vegetation type, there's a code that's assigned to these of 1233, contains eucalyptus, tereticornis, eucalyptus crabra, et cetera. So classic important tree species for koalas. So we rank that high. And we go down the scale and we get down to things like rainforest, conflicts notable vine forest will be very low, and then sand blows where there's largely devoid vegetation, we classify that as being non-habitat. So based on the information, we're actually able to classify all the vegetation that used to be there and all the vegetation that is there at the moment into those categories. So that's the starting point for our model. Then we've got information about whether there are records there. So I talked about those buffered records before, but we do include that as part of the model. So we get records from a whole stack of different sources. So WildNet is the DESI corporate database, and a lot of information from external people feeds into that. The systematic survey work that's been done by DES, koala-based local governments, ALA, and Q Wildlife. So information from all those data sources feeds into it. We filter them. So we get rid of old and imprecise records, get rid of duplicates, etc. And for the current version that's been released, we've got about 95,000 records. So not that many koalas, but over the years since 1975, that's how many records we've got that has fed into the habitat model. So that's the records. It's about whether there's a koala there or not. And the last component is that species distribution modeling. So it's a statistical tool. So it's commonly used around the world, statistical tool called Maxent. But basically what Maxent does is you give it the koala records and you give it an environmental variable, say soil, and you ask it to look to a relationship between those two. So it'll say if all the koala records are found on sandy soil, then it says that sandy soil is important for koalas. I mean, that's not the case, but that's the type of thing that Maxent does. So you feed it like soil, temperature, elevation, et cetera, a number of environmental parameters. And you ask it to look for those relationships and the strength of those relationships with where koalas are found. So that then allows us to rank areas from low, medium, and high. So we have, does it have the right sort of vegetation? Is there a koala there? And what are does it have the right sort of environmental variables? So once we put that into the matrix, then we can classify it. And if you have a look up in the top left-hand corner, the red areas there, so they have the best vegetation, there's a koala there, and has the best environmental variables that are fed into that. So as opposed down to the other corner, poor vegetation, if any, no koalas cited, and low in terms of the environmental variables that were included. So we can map that. We can map that. That's how much used to be there. So basically, the redder the better for koalas is a sort of a quick way of looking at it. So we can map how much there used to be and how much there is now, which is a bit of a scary comparison between the two. And what we've done in terms of feeding this into the koala conservation strategy and other statutory products is we've then taken the top part of that matrix. So this is the core koala habitat areas. So these are the best of the best in terms of vegetation, whether there's a koala there, and the environmental parameters. And that's what these maps here are. And I'll just go on to the next slide, just a bit of a larger of those. So once again, that's just the top part or the part of the matrix. So that's the how much used to be there in terms of koala habitat, and that's how much there is now, comparing between the two. So So in terms of applications, so I'm going through this quite quickly, but just in terms of applications, that core component of the habitat mapping is in the South East Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy. It is part of essential habitat under the Vegetation Management Act, and it has effect under that. And it is also part of wildlife habitat under matters of state environmental significance. So there's some of the statutory applications. But there's also a number of other applications, so non-statutory, and some of these non-statutory ones might actually take advantage of the full matrix and have a look at some of these areas down here that actually had really good vegetation, but didn't necessarily have the right environmental variables, but might still be worth having a bit of a look at. So there's a range of other non-statutory applications where both the core component and the other bits of the habitat model might be of use. So just looking now just at the northern part of the bioregion. So this is just focusing, so this is a bioregional boundary that we've been focusing on for this mapping. We're using the same methodology as for the southern part of the bioregion, but it's independent of the koala strategy. And just because we like calling things and giving abbreviations, acronyms, these are koala habitats. This is koala habitat suitability mapping. So that's separate from what's going on in the southern part of the bioregion where there's koala habitat areas. But it uses the same methodology, but we've just updated it to the latest available information that's fed into it, latest records, environmental variables, etc., etc. So there is an existing model. If you remember back to that statewide map that I had, there is an existing model for the northern part of the bioregion, but it doesn't include high value regrowth or maxent, those environmental variables. So certainly the high value regrowth is a really important contribution to this model. And there's a lot of work being done by other teams within Queensland Herbaceous Biodiversity Science to actually do update the mapping for the high value regrowth in the northern part of the bioregion. And we're hoping that that's going to be included in essential habitat under the VMA and matters of state environmental significance. So the 2024 update is due towards the end of this year. So just sort of getting back to the questions and things I was talking about before, seeing a koala doesn't mean that the area is core habitat. So just because there's a koala there doesn't mean it's actually identified as core habitat. But conversely, if you don't see a koala, that doesn't mean that it isn't core habitat. So I've got a few positives and negatives in there, but yeah, if there's no koalas there, that doesn't actually automatically say that that area isn't koala habitat. It can still be koala habitat, even though you haven't seen a koala. Everyone, hopefully, wants to see an increase in koala habitat and core koala habitat, and certainly the koala habitat that gets into the statutory mapping. It's really difficult to separate out changes due to input data. So if we compare the mapping we did this year with the mapping we did last year, the year before, etc., everyone wants to see that increasing each year, but identifying true losses and true gains, which is above and beyond improvements in the mapping and changing. So if we change one of those vegetation categories so that it's no longer core, it doesn't mean we've lost habitat. We've just reclassified that vegetation. So we've just got to try and separate all that out, all that type of stuff. So, but it is we were able to do that this year for the first time and just identify those true losses, and then have a look at those true losses in relation to whether there's development applications on there. So whether there's approved clearing or anything like that. So just recognizing also that restoration and rehabilitation is a long-term process. So for an area to be replanted or rehabilitated, grow up some trees, koalas get on there, it becomes mapped as high value regrowth. And then if it has all the other parameters, then it's included in the mapping, can take a few years. So that's definitely a challenge associated with that. Consistent mapping at a scale suitable for regulation. So I said we focused on the regional ecosystems and high value regrowth as our base mapping. And that's because they are statutory, they are in statutory products such as the Vegetation Management Act, etc. When we first started this project, we had a long look at scattered trees and whether we could identify koala habitat on the basis of scattered trees. First of all, can we identify scattered trees using imagery and imagery processing imagery? But also, can we value those scattered trees? So it was definitely a challenge. We weren't able to pursue that because Scattered trees aren't part of those statutory regulatory products. So we wouldn't have been able to include it in essential habitat under the Vegetation Management Act, even if we were able to identify it, unfortunately. And I guess the last point is just there's the interaction between ecology and policy legislation is definitely a challenge. So my team, we always try and provide the best ecological advice to inform planning decisions. But often planning decisions are made that may overwrite the ecological information they provide. So that's always definitely a bit of a challenge for us. So, and then just there's some information there. It's a whole stack of information on the web. There's the map, the general mapping, koala habitat mapping page. You can get a report. So if you go get a Vegetation Management Act, a VMA report, one of the maps in there will be koala habitat areas. And we are looking to create actually a separate report just for koala habitat and just teasing apart some of those elements that you saw earlier on in some of my slides. It's on the Globe. The data is available on the Globe. There's how to find it on there. And also, if anyone wants to access the data, the GIS data, it's available via QSpatial, so you can search. There's an email address there if anyone's got any questions. More than welcome to get in contact. So hopefully I've given you a bit of an introduction to the koala habitat areas under the strategy, and then just a bit of a talk about how we're extending that methodology and applying it to the northern part of the bioregion. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much for sharing the work that you are doing in terms of koala mapping. We have already quite a few questions coming in. Everyone, please continue asking the questions that you have for Steve in the Q&A box. We will collect them and we'll send and ask those questions, Stephen, at the end of all presentations. So please keep them coming. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you all to our second speaker tonight. It's Chris Mybush from the Toowoomba Region Koala Habitat Project. Chris' first ever koala sighting was at Mount Lofty in Toowoomba in 2017, even though he has lived there for over 30 years without actually thinking to go out to look for koalas. A retired community lawyer, he formed Save Mount Lofty, Inc., which is an urban-based land care organization that spearheaded the successful fight against federal government residential development on Mount Lofty's critical koala habitat escarpment land. Since 2017, Save Mount Lofty has conducted government-funded koala-related community projects, including bushfire preparation and habitat promotion. Today, Chris will delve into a thermal drone koala survey case study being done in the Toowoomba region. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, David. And I'm speaking to you this evening from Guybil and Jarrawa country on the Mount Lofty suburb on the northeastern corner of the Toowoomba city. So we're an urban-based land care group. And I'll be speaking to you tonight just to give our experience of our first foray into using thermal drones for koala survey work. So just a bit of background about Mount Lofty, Save Mount Lofty, that you've heard from David just now. I think it's important to reflect on the fact that whilst we've lived here for over 30 years and we haven't seen a koala in the wild in this area. And in fact, the developer professed that there were no koalas here. And within 12 to 18 months, by going out and looking for them, we found 6 koalas in a very distinct area close to where we're living. So our first work with thermal drones came when we met John McAvoy from CSIRO's National Koala Monitoring Project. He had a workshop out at Nimulmerin at Kurungara, and here's a picture of John in his looking like a bushranger with his thermal drone there, and that fascinated us, me in particular, as I had experience flying drones, but certainly not no experience in thermal drones. So John referred us then through to the methodology set out in their website, and it's a basic methodology just detailing how they go and at that stage how they went about their thermal drone surveys, and certainly both the CSIRO and ourselves have moved on significantly since that methodology was put up. So we then went from John, then we looked at the use of thermal drones across various sectors. In government, it's obviously used in law enforcement, search and rescue, and firefighting. Industry, there's a lot of 3D modelling done for developments such as solar farms and vineyards. But there's also inspection of transmission lines, very heavy use of thermal imaging. And overseas, a lot of use for game hunting in game parks, etc. In Australia, the use of thermal drones in wildlife is really captured by CSIRO's work, and then the various parks and wildlife services in the various states across Eastern Australia. And then each of the universities, certainly in Queensland here, have a unit that's concentrating on population surveys and area species mapping. And basically, a lot of that information is, a lot of YouTube videos that give you a great insight into where the technology is being used. So then in May 23, then we made an application to the Saving Koala Fund. And let's go through the criteria that we put up in our application. We sought the purchase of a thermal drone to conduct surveys to determine existing koala populations and likely wildlife corridors, to encourage landholders to consider koala tree plantings as part of their land management. So as a result of being successful in that application in November 23, after talking back with CSIRO, we arrived at the DJI Mavic 3T, which is the enterprise series of thermal drones. It's certainly not at the top of the level of the range of commercial drones, but it's not a recreational device. And it's certainly a couple of steps up from the drone that CSIRO had been using previously. As a result of that purchase, we identified that we needed a lot of accessory purchases, in particular additional batteries to enable us to be out in the field for longer, an external in-field monitor that's on the top left there to enable the observer to also have a screen and be checking real live footage to see, looking for koalas. Then a UHF radio to check aircraft movements in the area, fluoro vest signage, ground lighting, external power packs. Most importantly, though, a first aid snake bite kit on the bottom bottom right there. Very important, because the country that we're negotiating is, long grass and inherently dangerous. So then in December 23, the end of last year, we did our initial drone trials, and look at the three images there up the top. The left-hand image is what we all see when we're out in the field, just a canopy, either from the ground or from the air, just a canopy there, and you don't see anything. But the middle image is the thermal image, and there you can see the koala sitting there up in the tree. And then the right-hand image is the zoom, using the zoom lens of the Mavic 3T, showing the animal there on the slight left-hand side of that image. So it's obviously, our initial drone testings were very encouraging. We then realised, after consultation with CSIRO, that we needed CASA certification for night operations. That was when we were really going to get that distinction in temperature. So we went off and got Ripple and REOC training and certifications, quite an extensive and expensive process there. But we also obtained separate liability insurance coverage, as our Qualc insurance excluded drone operations. So then in March 2024, we were approached by a local landcare group, Gamaran and Doctors Creek Landcare Group, and they had a particular landholder considering an extensive tree planting on his cattle grazing property. And the district is Kelvinho, those that might know it. It's about 10 kilometres northeast of Oakey, about 25 kilometres northwest of Toowoomba, as you can see from that image, in southern Queensland. Then we went to Google Earth, obviously, to have a look at the habitat, obvious habitat there, as there's no koala habitat mapping for this area of the Toowoomba region, South East SEQ habitat mapping. But we also recognised the proximity of our property to the Oakey Army Aviation Base. So on our site visit, we had a 600-acre cattle property. We met with the landholder to discuss his property plan, his existing cattle operations, an understanding of his likely habitats, and the history of plantings across the property, and any recent reports of koala sightings in the immediate area. And from that, we identified 6 areas of koala habitat to be surveyed. And there you look in the turquoise rings there, you might be able to see A, B, C, D, E, and F of potential areas. And what you notice from there is probably what Stephen was talking about earlier. It's that scattered trees. We haven't got, forest here. They're scattered trees. And that's a challenge in terms of setting out your mission. Also, we needed to go back to CASA and lodge our flight documentation, given the nighttime operation is outside the standard operating conditions. And then we needed Okiami Aviation approval because we're less than 9 nautical miles from the base. So having got those permissions, we used the DJI Flight Hub 2 software for mission planning. And I tell you what, it's a steep learning curve to utilise the functionality of that program. And here's an example of our first mission tracking that we planned there. So that was for Area A that you saw earlier. And that's the grid patterns that basically as you'll see, the drones just going backwards and forwards, but covering those scattered trees just to the south of the homestead you see in the middle of that slide. So the logistics of the mission, 3 a.m. start, bright and early, because at that stage we had a 6 a.m. dawn, and that was weather permitting, and we cancelled one morning because it was just too cold and too windy. The project assistant and also the landholder acted as observers to keep visual line of sight to the drone and also to watch the infield monitor. And you need a good four-wheel drive because you need to move quickly between mission sites because of the valuable periods before dawn. So, Kim, if we can start that video. Our first takeoff from the front of the property here. Let's give a good look at it. Four-wheel drive to get across country. And then here's the drone with the lights going across the sky, keeping a visual line of sight. Okay, now we start again. So this is the next set of mission planning we did for areas B and C there. And there's E and F, and that's the most northern area there is quite extensive there, and you've got a lot of scattered trees, and there's a lot. Each one of those runs there is about 1.5 to 2 kilometres long. So here's the next video.
It's not exactly over the trees.
Did anyone spot the suspect?
In that tree. So the power lines are on the other side of the road?
Always a major concern of mine as to where the power lines are.
So there's just a little spot there, isn't there?
I should obviously have been using the zoom on the thermal camera here, but I came down. I always seem to be more confident dropping down closer.
450 metres to the bottom of the driveway.
There's definitely a spot there, isn't there?
So now we take a GPS shot of that animal.
Okay, so I'm just going to go into there.
And there we go. That gives the GPS coordinate.
Go back to there. We've tagged that now. so we can go back and have a look at that. But
Great, thank you.
it's not exactly over the tree.
Okay, so I've got a couple of other videos to come up, but what we learned from that that set of missions, we had 5 missions. We covered approximately 50,000 meters or 50 kilometers mission route traversed during those 5 missions, and we located 2 koalas in the southern paddocks along the roadway, and we found no koalas in those large back paddocks, and that really was that thinking on that was consolidated by recent comment and recent forum, both from CSIRO, saying it's just as important to know where koalas do not appear as where they do appear. So from the National Koala Mapping Program, they've had 55 sightings of koalas from 214 missions. So we've had 2 koalas from 5 missions. So we're in the ballpark in terms of our work. So here's the next video for our second koala that we sighted. So it's changing the viewing of the isotherm to make a clearer resolution of the animal. And there we go. There's our koala scratching himself, climbing up the tree.
We're a long way away from the animal.
Yeah, we're probably still about 30 or 40 meters away. So there we go. Clearly a koala. Right, so after dawn then we go back on the left-hand slide. You've got the GPS coordinates for that first koala. And so we fly back there after dawn and have to see if we can take some real-life photos from the drone. But this photo on the right was taken from the ground. So we got up within about, say, 10 meters of 15 meters of the animal and actually took that photo. And then our second second koala we took from the drone. So that's the zoom image on the left-hand side, and that's at the wide angle image on the right-hand side. And you can vaguely make out the koala there in the top of that tree next to the roadway. But obviously from the ground, you've got no prospect of seeing that animal. Then we arranged for our project volunteer ecologist to come along and provide species identification for the trees where we found the koalas, and also planting methodology advice to the landholder. And he identified the Eucalyptus camaldulensis, river red gum, as the tree that the koala was sitting in.
I'm pretty sure it's a river red gum or Eucalyptus camaldulensis. I'm making that guess on the shape of the operculums or the fruit that are coming through. They are quite distinctively shaped in this region compared to the other eucalypts. It is most likely, obviously, a planted specimen, just because of its proximity to the fence. And yeah,
this line of trees was planted by my dad, probably.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Probably as a land care project.
Yeah.
In probably the mid-1980s.
Yeah, okay. Because you've got Pterodocornis, camaldulensis, crabra. I don't know what this one is.
Is this a chinchilla white gum?
It might be.
Right, sorry for the jerkiness of that video there. But initial feedback from the landholder is that our drone survey helped him decide to plant new koala tree seedlings, including river red gum species, closer to the existing populations to the south to establish a corridor up to his vacant northern paddocks. So that was good initial feedback from him. But our early evaluation on the whole idea of thermal drone surveys is that it's a quite technically complex undertaking. Certainly for us without any sort of technical and extensive drone experience. And you've got to be prepared for a steep learning curve in terms of the functionality of the mission planning software. And the populations have a promising effectiveness to identify local populations of koalas, but it's also, this drone will be a valuable future local community resource for general wildlife surveys into the future. But I think what the biggest learning that we've had is the projects need to have a clarity as to how such surveys will assist the individual landholders beyond simply just learning, what's out there. A landholder that just wants to know if there are koalas there or not, where does that take us? But when it's tied into decisions regarding planting or habitat restoration, everything, that's a valid, and that's where projects need to focus, and certainly where we'll be focused with. And I think we've got 18 further drone surveys planned over the next few months. Obviously, one of the real advantages of being out just on dawn out in these properties is the beautiful images you get from the drone. And here's a drone shot of the scattered trees there, and then the property on the left of that image. And then here's a beautiful photo later in the morning, looking at from the north to the south, looking across the valley to the sorghum, and over the back there is the Okiami Aviation Base. So just a beautiful time to be out there, and you get repaid with the beautiful warmer mornings after the freezing that you might take at 3 a.m. in the morning. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take questions later in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm still in awe of this drone footage, which is the first time that I actually have seen this. So I really appreciate you including those videos and sharing your experience with us. If you have any questions for Chris, please send them through the Q&A button. And we now move on to our next speaker, Natalie Hillcoat from Healthy Land and Water. Natalie is a dedicated senior scientist in the land restoration team of Healthy Land and Water. She's taking the lead on koala threat mitigation and restoration projects across South East Queensland and source water protection, funded by South East Queensland Water across the Logan, Albert, and Upper Brisbane catchments. She has a diverse background in science and has held positions with CSIRO and the state government, working across various departments like entomology, dryland, agriculture, and sustainable ecosystems. And today, Natalie will share her insights from a targeted and transparent koala threat reduction program across South East Queensland in partnership with local governments and other key stakeholders. Over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, David. That's a pretty hard act to follow, Chris. I'll try and be as interesting with my presentation. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much, Kim, for inviting me to present tonight and represent Healthy Land and Water, and to share with you in more detail one of our koala programs funded by DESI. And that will be what I'll be focusing on tonight. The program is called SEQ Koala Threat Management Initiatives Program. It's a 3-year program, and we're about 8 months into it. Credit to my colleague Brianna Healy, who took this photo, and she's an avid koala photographer on the weekends. That's Bree down there on the bottom right-hand corner. This is the team that's working on the program. Tom Lally is the assistant team leader to land restoration team within Healthy Land and Water that I also work in. Got Brianna Healy, who's done all the mapping analysis behind the scenes and would normally do part of this presentation, but for efficiency reasons, I will attempt to undertake that tonight on her behalf. We've also got Indigo, who's just recently joined Healthy Land and Water. She has done extensive work in koala projects at the Old Hidden Vale Nature Refuge. So she's an asset to the team. So who is Healthy Land and Water? They're the peak NRM group for South East Queensland and have been for over 20 years. We specialise in research, monitoring, evaluation and project management. Our focus is improving and protecting the environment and educating communities. We work in partnership with traditional owners, government, private industry, utilities and the community. So this particular program that I'm going to speak to you about tonight sits within the SEQ Koala Conservation Strategy. And as I mentioned earlier, our program is a 3-year program. And within the SEQ Koala Conservation Strategy, there are 4 key target areas, and our program sits within the threat reduction area. The focus of this program is delivering on-ground threat abatement activities in 10 threat priority areas. And we, as part of this program, we are contributing towards, one of our priorities is contributing towards at least a 25% reduction in disease, injury and mortality rates within those areas. Stephen Howell's presentation earlier has been a really nice backstory to some of the data analysis that I'm going to be speaking about now. So the objectives of this program was a consultation phase across South East Queensland with key stakeholders. We have just completed that first stage, and we've completed 7 co-design workshops across South East Queensland, as well as one-on-one sessions with other key stakeholders. During these workshops, we shared an interactive map displaying some initial prioritisation analysis that Healthy Land and Water had done based on the DESI's koala mapping that Stephen has introduced tonight. And during these workshops, we added in real time local stakeholder information and activities and their local knowledge in the way of points and polygons on our map. And I'll share that with you in a moment. But we also discussed any discrepancies that our map was showing and any gaps. This also opened up good conversation for starting to identify those 10 priority threat areas that we'll focus on as part of this program, and also discussions about existing and planned projects and activities that this program could expand on, and any gaps that are existing to new projects that we will do as part of this program. So once those 10 priority areas have been identified and approved, including the proposed koala threat reduction projects within that, we'll develop some implementation plans and establish these for each area in partnership with the local LGAs for the delivery of those threat reduction activities. And also we need to establish a good monitoring program to measure the impact of those threat management activities we're having on the koala populations in those areas. So the threats, koala threats that we are focusing on as part of the DESI mapping are the list of 14 here, and I'll just give you a moment to have a quick read through those. And what you're able to do with the mapping is you can highlight separate threats, or you can do a combined threat analysis, which is what we did. So here's a quick overview of the methodology that we used for our initial priority area analysis using the DESI data, as well as some of Healthy Land and Water's koala data. You can see there that we combined the threat severity along with the habitat suitability data sets that Stephen was talking about, along with the koala sightings and the ARCs, or the areas of regional koala significance that Healthy Land and Water developed a few years ago. This highlighted areas of high threat and high habitat suitability, and these are the areas that we are going to focus on as part of our threat abatement activities. We used the natural breaks methodology that DESI used to then further prioritise and rank the priority within these priority areas. And we then took this information to stakeholders as part of those workshops to gather that additional information in additional areas and intel that they know about their local areas to fill in any of the gaps of the information that was displayed in the maps. So for those of you who are not familiar with the DESI mapping, it's made up of a series of polygons across SEQ, which are 1 kilometre wide hexagons or 100 hectares. There's 3,325 of those across SEQ. And from combining the habitat modelling data sets and the combined threat layer, we're able to identify different key threat priority areas. As I mentioned earlier, as part of our threat mitigation, we're focusing in on the high threat, high value areas, but it can also direct conservation priorities. So if you're wanting to pull out those areas of low threats and high value, as well as low threats and low value, so sort of that pre-clear value to inform where offsets and rehabilitation work should be carried out. So this is just a quick look at the 4 data sets that I mentioned earlier that we combined as part of our initial prioritisation. You'll recognise those from Stephen's presentation earlier. The habitat and threat values were multiplied to understand those areas of high suitability and high threat levels, and combined with the koala sightings. And then the map on the right-hand side highlights those arcs, those areas of regional koala significance developed by Healthy Land and Water. That was part of work that identified 20 priority koala habitat areas in South East Queensland, based on a combination of weightings of various factors: tenure type, patch size, connectivity of remnant and protected areas, ecological corridors, koala habitat restoration areas, koala priority areas, alluvial floodplains, and so on. And this just shows you an example of the different combinations of high habitat suitability, high threat areas, and how these values are scaled from a 0 to 1, and when multiplied, that helps us prioritise this data. So we then, as part of that prioritisation, we then selected the top 2 highest categories. So obviously these are all areas of significance, but in order to be efficient and allocate the resources efficiently, we have chosen the top 2 priorities out of all those priority areas. So just zooming in on an area here where we've combined all those 4 factors, we then get a ranking, lower priority to higher priority. You can see in the key there, the blue being the lower priority up to higher priority in the red areas. The purple outline are the arc areas that I mentioned earlier. And we're looking at an area there sort of from Upper Flagstone across to Caminia and down to Grantchester. So this is just an example of how we rank those priority areas. So this is what it looks like across the whole South East Queensland. These are representing those high threat, high habitat suitability areas. So this was the initial information that we took to workshops and to our one-on-ones with stakeholders. It's just a base level, start the conversation and to get their input into what they felt was a priority in their local area. This is what the map looked like once we completed all our collaborations and workshops. And the polygons, we've got blue there for activities, red for threats, and yellow as other information that don't fit into those 2 categories. And so you can see that we've been given a lot of valuable information and intel from those local stakeholders for their area, their individual areas. So the next steps for our project is we are currently analysing all of that data and to come up with that, and the final prioritisation to come up with those 10 koala threat priority areas. We'll then prepare a report and put that to DESI. and what we think those threat priority actions should be, or projects should be within those areas. So we have included the information from the individual LGAs, community groups, etc., that we gathered from all those consultations, as well as LGA action plans, their biodiversity corridors, vehicle strike data, specific koala action plans, etc. So soon we'll be submitting that to DESI and establishing those implementation plans, what the co-funding will look like, and defining the monitoring program based on that. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to your questions later on.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Yes, if you have questions for Natalie, feel free to send them through the Q&A field. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker tonight, Michelle Daly from the Koala Action Gympie region. For over 40 years, Michelle witnessed the joy of koalas on their 40-acre property firsthand, but starting to see reported declines locally and more broadly about 9 years ago, she took action by proposing and helping to establish a volunteer conservation group, which is called the Koala Action Gympie region. And since then, Michelle, together with other passionate koala advocates in the Koala Action Gympie region organization, strives to create a more koala-aware community that cares for its koalas and their habitat. Today, she's a committee member in the public relations role of the Koala Action Gympie region, and a member of the Wildcare Noosa and Sunshine Coast Koala Rescue Team. Today, Michelle will share the inspiring story of the Koala Action Gympie region and how you as an individual can make a difference for koalas. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay, good evening, everybody. So, yeah, my presentation's probably just sharing the journey of our group, and with our focus on trying to create a more koala-aware community here in Gympie region. So when I talk about Gympie region, I am talking about the LGA area. So I've just put up a little map to give you an idea of where Gympie region sits. I think people all know where Gympie is, but maybe aren't aware just how far west this region goes. It is a big area of, nearly 7,000 square kilometres. So I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land where we live and where our group does its work, and that's the Cubby Cubby people, and to the north area, the Butchulla, and across to the west, the Waka Waka people. So that's just a bit of a sense of Gympie region and the size of our area. So look, I'll start with how it began, and you've mentioned, my own experience here on our property of seeing koalas since we came here 40 years ago. And for myself, the passion probably just started with this koala down the bottom, Eugene, who we came to know and love very much, and could often find him in his favourite trees. And above is a koala we call Phoebe, and we had the absolute joy and privilege of seeing her raise 8 joeys over 8 years. So that up close and personal experience certainly has been a driving factor for me in wanting to do something. So we started by an event, Land for Wildlife Day, and we had speakers with a focus on koalas, and that really galvanised us into forming a group. None of us were experts, but we certainly all shared a passion for the species and its future in our region. And I would say probably of the initial 15 or so people that put their hand up to form a group, most of us were on properties where there were koalas, and quite a few were in the wonderful Land for Wildlife program. Okay. So back then, and this is late 2014 into 2015, a big driving factor for us was that there was just koalas weren't being mentioned here. There was limited awareness of the presence of Gympie region koalas. There was very little data in the state wildlife database. There was no protections here were quite limited. The koalas at the time we first met were listed as vulnerable in South East Queensland, but not in the rest of Queensland. And that did happen during our first year, that the vulnerable status was extended to the rest of Queensland. So we had less protections and continue to do so because we're outside of SEQ. So, for example, koala spotters aren't mandated in koala habitat areas because our area doesn't have koala habitat legislated. Okay. So our initial objectives were to address that very, the limited information we had about the populations in the region. So just that was really our big first focus, was getting the community on board to report sightings. Obviously fostering public awareness about koalas and initiating any sort of activities that could help. We had a big learning curve in terms of getting our head around legislation and policies, etc. So with data gathering, we encouraged the community to report sightings, and there were just so many reasons sightings data was important, and I've listed a lot of them there you might want to look through. But what we found is that, just getting across the community, koalas are here, because a lot of people don't see them. So that was very important, but we definitely wanted our data into the state database, and we wanted koalas considered in decisions. It certainly has also been very useful for our group to guide our conservation activities and where we focus activities and plantings, etc. So initially we had a bit of a manual sighting form, but a few years ago we were very fortunate that the Gympie Council's environment team developed something called Wild Watch Gympie, which is an online database that was designed to fit very well with the state WildNet specifications. So that's just an image of sightings that are available, and on this site people can report threatened species as well as vehicle strikes on native animals. And I'll just take you to our dashboard. So this is what we find invaluable, is we can look at the sightings. We're gathering data on as you can see from the graphs, and the graph at the bottom where you see the peaks is obviously breeding season impacts. Because I'm also involved in rescue, I do make sure that every impact into where a koala is rescued for disease or injury or whatever is recorded in here. So we've really got a good data set on that. So we actually do, for our region, because we've got such a good system here, Kew Wildlife has come in since, but we do encourage people in Gympie region to stick with this one because it brings up this data for us, and it goes quite seamlessly across. It can be exported easily and does export easily to WildNet once a record is verified. So that works well for us. And we have been building on the data, and a bit like Chris with the federal funding, we have been getting some areas of the region droned, so that, and this is mainly protected areas, and we've been very encouraged by the results coming in to see koala presence in most of those national parks where we've been droning. There's a lot more to come, and results will be forthcoming later on. So that's about our data gathering, and just it makes a difference. So we've been able to get good results with TMR because we've been able to provide the evidence, and they look at that database, we refer them to it. And it was interesting, you know, some members of the public said, oh, you actually want to know about dead ones. So, you know, that awareness getting out there, getting it recorded has led to some very good results with signage, and with the trailer sign there, that's a first for us. That's on the Mary Valley Highway because we had 2 koalas killed within metres of each other last July. So TMR agreed on with that information to put the trailer sign there, and that will continue this year. Okay, so the other key thing we do as volunteer group in the area is all that education and awareness in all sorts of different ways. So you can have a look at that list there. So it's, you know, we do local events and talks and whatever. So I'll just run through a few little slides here. So lots of koala conversations at events. That's at the Mary River Festival coming up in July. Great event if anyone wants to come up to it. And next slide. Why isn't that moving? Oh, here we go. That's just an example in, sorry, click twice there. In some of the parks in the region, we've got, just back again, apologies there, guys. Must be going too fast. Yes, we've got some interpretive signs in 5 parks around the area. That just gives you an idea. They have different wording on it, like might be wild in Walby. And we have community forums. So we, you know, right across the region. So we pick koala hotspots and have a forum. So this Sunday we've got one. It's our first in an urban sort of area, on the urban fringe, the growth area of Gympie. We've got a forum trying to focus in on those koalas under pressure from growth and development. Okay. So we do find that just with the increased community awareness, a lot of that is around, you know, people letting us know about their sightings, and we are finding really a lot more koalas being identified earlier in treatment of chlamydia. So a call might come in and to me, and it might be this, oh, Michelle, there's a koala in a tree out in the Mary Valley Highway. And I might pop out and, you know, because, you know, we really encourage the use of zoom cameras and binoculars, and then we might identify that there is in fact something wrong. So that poor little koala there, Lucy, is currently at the hospital, having been so we have a big focus on breeding season awareness each year and put up some signs about that, and we encourage council to help with the breeding season awareness. So that ad on the right there is an ad that they ran quite a few times, the council, in the local paper. So that was good. And we just have our own pop-up signs that we put up, and they are pop-up signs, so they go up for, you know, maybe a month and come down again. We've had very good feedback from the community about that, making them aware that koalas are there. So in terms of activities, obviously habitat work is our key activity. We encourage members of the public, if they're interested in a planting, to contact us. We apply for grants so that we can support those plantings. And we have a planting dashboard. We got some funding to do this, just so we can keep track of our plantings. And we did, planting happens on both private and public land, and this is an example of the rail trail in Bull to Burloo, where we've planted a lot of trees along there. And you can see all the different groups that contributed to that, including Queensland Koala Crusaders, which was very much appreciated. At the beginning, I mentioned 3 key objectives, but over the years, we added a 4th objective, which is the working collaboratively with other stakeholders. My quote here is, saving our region's koalas will need a collaborative and committed effort from all levels of government, stakeholders and community members. So we are a volunteer conservation group, and but everyone has a role to play. It can't just be us or government or whatever. So we've developed lots of sort of relationships there, and you know, look to stakeholders to say, well, you know, what can you do in your space to improve things for koalas? So, you know, when our group formed, I think, you know, we started asking questions of council, and that was really positive, because they then thought, well, proceeded to look at, well, okay, we need to improve our koala habitat mapping. We'll develop a koala conservation management plan. So having those discussions, influencing and advocating is very important. I think having a group has been good in that we've been able to then be on some reference groups like the koala monitoring program on the Bruce Highway here. So end of the year, Gimpy will probably be bypassed. So that section went through some areas, and we're on the reference group. We also on a council biodiversity reference group meeting, and very committed to input to the new planning scheme, and really keeping an eye on that. So just in finally, the value of a grassroots community group. Well, first of all, I think we have an absolute responsibility, but we have local knowledge of threats and solutions, and a group has people power and legitimacy, and there is much we can do, and there are people who are interested. So obviously there are challenges being volunteers, and organisational sustainability is the big one for any volunteer group. So we've been working on a business plan and really working on trying to develop some income streams to have, you know, a paid worker to help with the work. I think I wrote down a word before, persist, because what I find is there's always a new issue, there's always a new challenge, there's always a new development that's, you know, in koala habitat or whatever. So having that, having persistence, and having a, what's the word, you know, a sustainable group, and people coming up behind us is really important, and quite a challenge. So thank you all for listening, and we'll listen in on questions later.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's quite inspiring what your grassroots organization does. And I look forward to learning more about the challenges you encounter when trying to engage the community to participate in koala conservation initiatives. Now I would like to introduce you to our final speaker tonight, Cameron Costello, who is from Kayak. Cameron is a Quandamooka man and is currently the CEO of the Quandamooka Yulu Burrarbi Aboriginal Corporation, also known as Kayak. Kayak is a registered prescribed body corporate created under the Native Title Act 1993 to manage the recognized native title rights and interests of the Quandamooka people. In this role, Mr. Costello is responsible for balancing the competing demands of achieving sustainable economic outcomes while ensuring the interests of the Quandamooka people are represented. Today, Cameron will present about First Nations involvement at the state and the national level, and his experiences being a part of a national Queensland and South East Queensland koala recovery groups. Please welcome Cameron, and over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay? No echoes? That's good. Thanks. I'm operating with phone and laptop because my laptop hasn't got sound, so hopefully it works and it will go well. You're everyone. Hello, my name's Cameron Costello, and I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands wherever we meet, all of us, and I'm on my ancestors' country, Quandamooka country in South East Queensland, Moreton Bay off Brisbane, and it takes in the coastal landscape, including a whole range of islands from Walgumpin to Minjerribah, which is more affectionately known as North Stradbroke Island or Stratty. Yeah, I've had the privilege. I'll have to sort of updated my bio. I'll go to my next slide about if I can try. Yeah. They're the various roles where I sort of fit in. So I've actually progressed from being CEO. I was CEO for Kayak for 7 years from finished up in 2020, and I'm now currently, for my many sins, the chair of the organisation, which is actually an absolute honour. I'll talk more a bit about that, but I'm also a member of the Queensland Koala Advisory Council, and this has all come off the back of my role as CEO for Kayak, member of the National Koala Recovery Group with Minister Plebiscite at the federal level. I'm a director of Healthy Land and Water, of which Nat and crew are doing a sensational job, and also was a facilitator in terms of helping develop an SEQ traditional owner koala action plan on behalf of the Department of Environment and Science. So I was going to sort of work down from the national level down to where the grassroots of Quandamooka action around koala protection. So I was starting out with the National Koala, Recovery Plan. I'm on that committee, and also co-chair with Ollie Costello, a First Nations advisory group to this broader committee. But I just wanted to sort of mention the starting point for us is essentially there's fundamental human rights matters of First Nations people wanting to care for country and having the rights to care and access their traditional natural resources and their ecosystems, of which the koala is quite significant for a number of First Nations groups. And it's you can see from there some of the key values and principles about the role of the koala in First Nations communities in terms of their connection to country, their dreaming stories and creation. And over that lengthy tens of thousands of years, the intimate knowledge that First Nations people have had in terms of their traditional knowledge in managing koala habitat and landscape, of which the common theme is that we want to be still to continue and work with our allies, the various groups like Michelle's, to actually take forward and care for koalas as well. So I think for us as First Nations people, having cared for country for millennia is how we continue to do that, how we inform all the various frameworks that we're all looking at from local level through to government and industry of how we can connect. So these are still some of the key points out of that National Recovery Plan, which acknowledges First Nations people's desires and roles and importance of the koala as well. And I think that's not me, Costello, that's Ollie Costello. I wish I could claim that one there, David, but I can't. But I think it's a really important statement that it's just one of many culturally significant species that, in terms of managing landscape and burning country for, that traditional burning, that we actually have them in mind. And it's that the way we manage our country is actually not just for our benefit, but it's actually for the benefit of our flora and fauna, including the koala. And we're wanting to make sure that good land management is there for the benefit of our threatened species, including koala. And that cultural deepness is also in place there with songlines, etc. as well. And we look to keep those pathways for koalas happening in the future. If we jump down to the Queensland level, so part of the Queensland Koala Advisory Council is developing the South East Queensland strategy, and that's premised on the Gura Gura framework. Is the Department of Environment Science's framework for engaging and reframing the relationship with First Nations people, and how they do that with the threatened species management is critical. Here's some of the strategies and themes and targets that were out of that. So across these various sections, at that level, what we were particularly for advocating from a First Nations perspective is how First Nations cut across all those different themes and actually contribute to those themes as well. So a lot of us have, particularly if you look at kayak as a native title body, that we are managing national park. We have got the largest land for wildlife declaration in South East Queensland from First Nations groups. And we're going to post-mining rehabilitation on our island, where we're actually creating, and in our rehabilitation process, we're creating koala habitat as well for our large, like we have a good healthy species on the island and across Quandamooka country on the mainland as well. So we look at how we can play our role with our rangers. We've got a lot of rangers that can feed into these various streams and continue to deliver on those targets and outcomes. One of the interesting projects was that Des got me, the Department of Environment Science got me to help bring together traditional owner groups in South East Queensland to actually look at a koala conservation action plan and what role First Nations might want to play in terms of koala conservation. And there was three themes. The first was about acknowledging, and that was basically acknowledging the connection of First Nations people with koalas, and that comes back to connection to country, human rights, about empowering First Nations people to help care for threatened species like the koala, and traditional knowledge, which was our sustained knowledge of a healthy landscape and how that can help to stem the decline in the koala population as well. So we've and then there's another few points around that. So that obviously our dreaming stories, etc. And how we might work with the department about elevating some of those stories. And so through the growth and elevation of First Nations stories, it's actually protection and conservation about koalas and threatened species as well. Looking at artworks, etc., how that might be critical to helping bring awareness, education to the broader public about First Nations and koala conservation, and also in language as well. So traditional names for language of koala was important to the First Nations people in South East Queensland. The second thing was caring for country, which is about supporting First Nations people, big desire to be actively engaged in caring for koalas. And that was specifically looking at our Indigenous knowledge and how we can combine that with our local community groups, our local scientists and government to look at how we combine all of our knowledge together to address the concern and the issue that was happening. And for us, it was also about that development of koala safe neighbourhoods and habitat restoration. So for us, for Quandamooka people who have lands have been recognised, and where future growth and development of residential housing, for example, on country, how do we do that in a sustainable way, for koala friendly way? And how do we look at habitat restoration of ex-mining sites and other areas that might be possibly utilised for koala habitat? And then the other thing was about partnerships and capacity building. So what funding opportunities are out there? A lot of it was about, you got First Nations people who are managing country, that if they're capable, but they just don't have the funding to help have more rangers, etc., to come in and do that. So I think that was about what partnerships and capacity building across South East Queensland, and linking into projects that we can share, and whether it's transport projects or offset sites, etc. How do we look at that and be involved with that partnerships? And you'll see there on that page is that for kayak, for us, we actually have we're developing specific strategies, and this one's a sustainability strategy, which for us is about developing and implementing a Quandamooka koala strategy for us. There's a lot of issues on the island around domestic dog attacks, and we have issues around vehicles driving, etc. Where the other primary issue we have is if there's an injured koala that has to be taken to the mainland. We have our species on the island are they don't have the same strains of chlamydia as the mainland. So there's actually a policy to not bring them back because there's a risk of bringing back disease and decimating our population on the island. So there's these issues that we have about translocation, etc. And one of the key things for us on island is to look at those is like how we can get treatment facilities on island, so we don't actually have to have them going off island as well. There's a fair few things that for us that we have been looking to progress over time with koalas. So actively working with the mining company who used to mine, like they had to have their koala plans in place, and they had a lot of data. So utilising some of that data to try and get that baseline and more information and research around our koalas. The other thing too is that we've our partnerships with a lot of universities and stuff. So we've actually had the dogs. I think Raman from up the sunny coast was training her dogs on the island at our sites. Some of our sites are release areas for the injured ones as well. And more recently around drones, sort of like Chris, we've used some of those drones, the thermal drones as well. So our rangers are being trained up. And so now we've got a couple of big drones on the island that our rangers are there to utilise as well. There was a massive planned burn. So we have to undertake a lot of planned burns on the island as well. And so there was a really good project where going into the burn was all the big thing was about how we scope and look for koalas. And so there was I think the drones, etc., were all about locating and making sure that under the planned burn system that we were protecting koalas and be able to ensure their safety whilst we undertook caring for country activities. So where the Quandamooka people see themselves as playing a major role in reducing the decline of the koala, and we actually are very keen to look at that education, how we might create programs that visitors to the island, we get lots of tourists to the island, will be able to be educated and go away as ambassadors as well. So that koala education and koala facilities are some things that we're really keen to look at for moving forward, as we're significantly concerned about our mainland Quandamooka country, but all of South East Queensland and the decline of the koala. And, even around where I live, I'm up at Wynnum, which is near the mouth of the Brisbane River on the coast. And, there's parks where 10 years ago I'd be walking through and I used to go and look and see koalas, and they're gone. Now they're just gone. And I think there's been, hasn't been the necessary attention from local councils around the strategies for koala. And I think that's something that we're going to all have to strongly advocate for. I think there's one of the things I don't have on there is that I'm actually a committee member for the Queensland Government's Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Legacy Committee. And so even thinking from all of those different angles, the role of potentially Olympic mascots being koalas, what we can do to raise the profile of 2032, the legacy being the reduction in the decline of koalas, and what the role that mascots, etc., through the power of having the eyes of the world upon us, we may be able to leverage that to play that role, and as well as on ground day-to-day work, but also how do we educate the public to get this serious issue in the front of their minds as we move towards the eyes of the world being upon us in 2032. So there's a lot there, and that's pretty much the information I wanted to sort of share with you, and happy to take any questions about what we're doing. But essentially we're now looking at having our own specific strategy at work, wanting to lead that because we are the largest landholders on the island, and the opportunities for us to help lead in support with industry, community, industry and government to take forward and play our role in terms of koala conservation is something we're keen to do from a First Nations perspective. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for sharing your insights. If you have any questions for Cameron, feel free to send them through. I guess we will start now with the Q&A, and we start with a couple of questions for Stephen and Natalie. So you all have time to submit your questions for Cameron and Michelle as well. The first questions we got were around how you decided in terms of the region that you do your koala mapping. So you focused on, Stephen, the question is for you. So your focus was on South East Queensland, and some of our participants were wondering if there are already studies out there that looked at different regions, such as Central and North Queensland or the South Burnett region. And if there hasn't been any studies done in those regions, if DESI is planning on extending their current work to those regions.
So thanks, David, and thanks very much for the question. I can't talk specifically about any studies that may have been done because I'm not necessarily aware of those. But in terms of the work that we're doing, so for those areas outside the SEQ regional plan area, that's shaping SEQ area and southern SEQ, and outside the northern part of the bioregion, we've got that updated model. We've got those buffered and filtered records. But certainly our long-term goal is to create a koala habitat map for the full extent of the koala across its whole range. So those points that you saw before, going out west to the Mulgalands and up to the INZ uplands, ideally we would like to create a habitat model that covers that full extent. So we just got to work our way to it.
Fantastic. And then also another very interesting question from Mandy. What were the environmental parameters that you found most informative in the koala habitat modeling?
There's a number of parameters that were used in the MaxCent modeling. And if you have a look at the report, and I've just got the report with me here, and I had the advantage of going first and seeing the questions come up. So I've been able to sort of just quickly have a look at some of the information that was being asked for. So, but if you have a look in the report, you can see the parameters that we used and that best explained the location of the koalas, the koala records. So things like elevation, seasonality, slope, soil water, etc., etc. So there's a range of number of parameters. So that's table 4 in the current report. As it turns out, slope was the environmental parameter that we found that most explained the location of the records, but that doesn't necessarily mean that slope is one of the important drivers for koalas, because slope is so related to a number of other variables. So in terms of vegetation type of things like that. So they're all sort of interrelated. So, but yeah, definitely have a look at the report. That table 4 gives you the variables we used and their contribution to that MaxCent model.
Okay, fantastic. And Natalie, you might be able to chip in to answer this question in terms of when you model the koala habitat, how is it? Are you able to include like parameters such as wildlife corridors into the model?
In terms of the koala habitat mapping itself, so we didn't specifically value areas above and or below other areas because they were in a corridor. So we've got corridor mapping as part of the conservation assessment work that we do across the whole of the state, but certainly in South East Queensland, that identifies corridors for a range of reasons, not just koalas. But we didn't sort of fine tune that and focus and identify areas that are important corridors for koalas. And I guess one of the advantages of doing that, because if we focus on the areas that are important corridors, we might exclude some of those other areas. So some of those other smaller isolated bits of vegetation that aren't part of that corridor, we didn't want to exclude those because in a fragmented landscape, pretty much any patch of koala habitat, whether it's part of a corridor or not, can be quite important, and can be quite important as koalas move from one area to the next. So that's why we didn't focus on including corridors, and we included all those sort of smaller patches of habitat in our mapping.
Okay, thank you. Natalie, do you have anything to add in terms of the parameters or the wildlife corridors?
That's something we're certainly taking into account when we're looking at our 10, as part of our prioritisation and focusing in on 10 areas. We're taking in conservation plans, all those LGA, koala conservation plans, action plans. They have also, most of the LGAs have got biodiversity corridors identified. So that's definitely what we look at when we're looking down at that local level, as well as paddock trees. And that was mentioned a lot at our workshops. So that's the sort of thing that we're definitely taking into account when we're looking at all that other information and data outside, on top of the mapping information.
Okay.
And that's definitely where that fits in terms of that value adding and that extra stuff about identifying those corridors. That's definitely a perfect application.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big priority, is that connectivity. Yeah.
Okay. Chris, now I have a couple of questions for you. First, could you talk a little bit about the cost of purchasing the drone and the accessories and going through all the training you went through?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing to indicate is that whilst we sought federal government funding in this application, there was certainly an expense that we were, as our organisation, we were looking to raise to meet privately through various benefactors to our organisation. And I would encourage other organisations to see the value in it, and if you properly explain your intended expenditure, you'll find very supportive people out in the community that may be willing to chip in. But we received funding from federal government. We spent $7,500 on the drone. We could have spent $15,000 on the drone, but we didn't see that the functionality of the higher level drone was warranted. We spent $2,500 on accessories like the radio and the screens, etc. Training and certifications about $3,500, not cheap. But the most expense we had was about 100 hours of training and trials. I mean, it just takes a lot of time to become proficient and to work on the software planning. So that's where the real expense is, in that 100 hours, at least there. So it's an expensive undertaking, but I would encourage other groups to really look at private funding. And as I said, if we hadn't got this application up, we still would have, might have taken us longer to kick it on, but we still would have privately funded it.
Okay. And since landowners are such an important stakeholder group for your work, can you talk a little bit about your experiences you have with engaging and getting landowners excited about working with you as a project?
It's absolutely inspiring. Basically, we're working on the Downs here, in the Darling Downs. We're dealing with cattle graziers, and it's inspiring to see their commitment to their property. You know, when you drive in their four-wheel drive around their paddocks, they know every blade of grass, every weed there, and they recognise the clearing that's been done by their great grandfathers and their grandfathers and or their great grandmother in one example, and they recognise that the need to bring it back. And there's also a lot of work being done in relation to scattered trees, and I know Bill Ellis from UQ is looking at that sort of modelling to identify what is the sweet spot where you've got trees available for shade for cattle, and it also available as koala habitat. And obviously the two can coexist. And you've got all the farmers that we're dealing with, obviously they're farmers that are considering planting, so they're probably on that end of the spectrum, but they're inspirational in terms of the knowledge of their properties and their preparedness to work, and their preparedness to, because as part of our project, we're videoing and preparing YouTube videos about the whole experience. And they want to be front and center. They don't want to be anonymous. They want to tell the story. And the example I gave tonight will be a 8 to 10 minute YouTube video coming up. And yeah, it's inspirational, and that the enthusiasm and the passion there will come through. And I'm sure that if we show that to other landholders across the state, they'll be similarly inspired to get involved.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Michelle, I've got a couple of questions for you. First, did the funding for the road signs work? Did you have to fund them yourself? Did you work with the local council together? How did that work? You're on mute.
Yeah. Look, our pop-up signs here, we just funded ourselves. I mean, they're pretty cheap. But the trailer sign, obviously that was a TMR initiative. So we just, we do submissions, we advocate and say, well, look, can you do something more on this road? So that was TMR, and certainly TMR have done a lot more koala road signage where we've identified the extent of areas that koalas are. So we've had a lot of improved road signage through TMR, and a couple of interactive kind of signage in the area. But the pop-up signs are, just funded by ourselves, and we mainly just put them up on council roads because TMR don't allow people to put their own signs up on TMR roads. Yeah.
And can you speak to some of the challenges you have encountered when you try to get residents excited about koala conservation activities, such as submitting sightings?
Yeah, look, I did see someone ask a question, and look, some people are reticent about that. Yeah, look, I think we just accept there will be people that just are not going to put sightings in. And then there's people that just don't do it because it's technology. So we certainly have, quite a few situations where people just give us the information and one of us put it in, the sighting, through to people that, like I was talking to a chap today, and he's been seeing koalas a bit, and I've encouraged him a bit, and he said today, oh, finally I've started doing it on my phone. So sometimes it's a bit of persistence and reassurance to people. I probably, it's, we have an area, like I want to get some road signage on the, heading west, where you've got bigger properties, less sightings, some koalas have been hit. And, we haven't got we're not getting the signage at the moment. So I'm really going to have to reach out to that community and say, look, I need that data. Can when you drive along, can you stop and get the GPS and send it to me? So, yeah, I think it just takes a lot of conversation and trust building a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
So we certainly recognise that that's an issue not just for koalas, for any threatened species that might get into statutory mapping. People are always a bit cautious about including it, because then it's seen as if the government will come in and then stop what they can and cannot do. So, those definitely the main strategy is just to educate people and say about how the mapping's used and the importance of protecting koala habitat. So,
yes, and I like, sometimes I use the example of, like the transmission lines, with the hydro, there's people concerned and mentioning koalas, but they haven't. So sometimes I use them as an example, as sometimes a big infrastructure project can come your way. And that has happened out of the blue, and people have said, but there's koalas here. And I said, well, record them. That's a good example of why you should record them. So for us, that's the next big project in our area. We're wanting to meet up with the hydro people soon about the koalas in that area.
And the more records and the more sightings that get into the system, the more it contributes to our model. And also helps us provide the best advice to say, and as I said before, that you don't have to have a koala to have habitat. When we get asked some questions in terms of planning decisions, we say, well, it is core koala habitat. And by the way, some koalas have been seen there. So it just adds to the information that we provide.
Yeah. All right, Cameron, I've got a question from you for you from Naisha, who absolutely loves seeing koalas at Minjerribah and is wondering how the population on the island is doing. Is it healthy and prospering?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it is healthy and prospering. And it's, I was talking to my dad who grew up on the island, so he's been there, and he never used to, he couldn't remember koalas being in the townships at all, but they've become, for whatever reason, they're very visible now in the townships as well. So they are healthy. Our key concern is about obviously dogs and visitors coming to the island. Our resident population is very conscious of, the different mating seasons, etc., about protecting them. But that during the holiday period is one of education, and I think we'll be looking at ways to educate people around that. There's a lot of great signage. Like Michelle had all of the the signage that they had up in their region. There's similar on the island, and lots of signage by the state government, etc., around the awareness of it. We have an ongoing issue of a historical, I guess, people with dogs on the island, and so it was a few years ago that when I was CEO, I actually went out and said, "Oh, perhaps we should grandfather, dogs off the island." And didn't I cop it? So there's a bit of I think, an education process about, the future of dogs on the island with koalas, and it's just, in my mind, it's just incompatible. My father had koalas in his yard, and the dogs next door, they tried to rescue it, and it crawled into the yard where the dogs were next door, and we lost that one. So for me, it's something that we have to really look at as a community. But we do have a very nice, healthy population, and I think that for us is a blessing. And we're just trying to look at how we can keep it's more the mainland that we're worried about, and how we can stop the rapid decline. And you can, visibly, there was, as I remember as a young fella down at Cleveland, in those areas, that you would see them so visible, but they're just not there anymore. So we're quite concerned. They're still around, they are still around, but we've got to take some serious action. And I just think there's a big challenge ahead of us. But on the island, we're all good.
Okay. For anyone who would like to learn more about the koalas on Minjerribah, we actually have another koala forum on the 1st of June, and I invite anyone to join us there, either in person, it's at the UQ Research Center facility on the island, or also online. You can register through the Wildlife Watcher webpage. That brings us to the end of tonight's session. I would like to be mindful of everyone's time. I guess we could keep on talking for the rest of the night, but I would like to thank very much all our speakers. I really appreciate that you took the time to share your experiences and your insights on how we can protect koalas in not only in South East Queensland, but Queensland wide. If you have any questions, feel free to send them through. You can also obviously contact us through social media channels or through our webpage. And of course, we are more than happy to connect you with all the speakers. Thanks, everyone.
Definitely, Cameron, there are a few sort of, sorry, David, there were a few specific questions there. So I tried to respond to a few of them. But yeah, as you say, if anyone's got any questions about particular locations or whatever, we're happy to answer that about the habitat mapping.
Thank you, Stephen.
Not now. I was going to do it via email.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.